Hello, welcome to this session of Critical People Analytics. The intention of this session is to discuss the consequences and the implications of using people analytics when making with the intention to make decisions, and in particular on strategic decisions, and that could affect not only other people but also ourselves. So as you see, the way that we are going to discuss implementation is not in a practical way, in a pragmatic way. Is in a more substantial way, and this is the idea of the critical people analytics in terms of scrutinizing our own values, our own ethical values when implementing this sort of very sophisticated way of analyzing and making decisions with data that don't belong to us, really, right? So there are sometimes co-workers who are providing this, what we call, this slightly aseptic name, data. The data, as probably you imagine, is not aseptic and it's not naive. Right, so we are talking about using information from people here. Sometimes I'm not saying that we are not necessarily talking about confidentiality, or non-confidentiality. So even the data who is not confidential is sensible, and we have to be clear that make it clear for us and for other ones that we are using this data in order not to produce a negative impact in others and also a negative impact on us. So the idea is to discuss which are the, for example, which could be the major consequences, who should be the ethical stance. So is any sort of what is the limit between the legal and the ethical, and when using analysts, which responsibilities we have when we assume the role of critical analyst of this data. What is the limits of data gathering? We can use any sort of data, even if it is confidential, and even if we have the agreement of the people to use the data and to provide the data and to participate in producing the data. Are we able to use any sort of data, even personal data, for example, or do we have to limit ourselves to professional data? And you obviously, right, how to manage this in the context of inclusion, discrimination, equal opportunities, and any other correlated issues that could affect our understanding of using and producing data. So the first main concern is that any sort of HR department or any sort, even I would say strategic manager, needs to consider which are the limits of producing data, where this data came from, right? And not necessarily if it is volunteering the participants to produce the data, but also where it comes from in terms of which is the rationale of using data from others in order to make decisions. Obviously, right? So, for example, right, in the 70s, in the 60s, it was very common to find managers, like, for example, Iacocca, right? It was very, very famous, who said that, I am the owner of the data of the people who work in my company. Therefore, this is Iacocca says, I can do with this data whatever I want, even to decide, for example, who remains in the organization and who has to leave the organization. You see, so using the data from the people, data produced by their own people, to decide about their future. So is this ethically responsible, or is part of the contract, let's say, and even the psychological contract of the people when working in a place, to give permission to be generators of data and give the right to the organization and the managers to use the data as they wish? is something that we as workers and employees signed for or agreed to or not. Yeah, and if we are in a managerial role, do we consider that this is our role, right? So basically, or not, and which are the limits, yeah, of this. And this is the basic statement of what we are going to discuss, and what is needed to conduct in an ethical inquiry. I'm not saying that we cannot produce any sort of data. We can produce, but which are the ethical? You see, the ethical limits of both data producing and gathering and data analysis. Yeah. In most of the cases, there are valid reasons. I'm not saying that it's not possible. I'm saying that to use any sort of data data produced by people to decide about we have the responsibility to produce data. So it's part of the managerial task. Yeah. I'm saying that, in critical people analytics, from the perspective of critical people analytics, this way of collecting and producing data has to be profoundly discussed, and usually the new tendency is to make the people who are the providers of this data participants, not only on the producing of the data but also on the analysis. So let me show you a very, very brief comment, from someone who was discussing this concept of critical analytics, and in particular the ethical dimension.
So my name's David Green. I've got quite a lucky job, really. I travel the world. I'm write and speak about people analytics and its role in the future of work. I also work with IBM customers on their people analytics journeys, and also increasingly how they're weaving in things like personalization and machine learning into their HR processes for employees. And then the third part of my role is I work for the Smarter Workforce Institute, which is IBM's research team, which is looking at aspects of the future of work, such as people analytics and employee experience. I think it's three things. I think number one, I think it can help the business have better outcomes, which and in doing so it can help increase HR's impact in the business, which I think, to be fair, there's room for improvement. But I think the thing I'm most excited about, actually, particularly with some of the new methodologies and capability that's coming in, is it can really start to improve the employee experience and the well-being of people at work. And if that's not HR's role, then I don't know what is. I think it can really start to unlock insights that actually help drive a better employee experience, better health of employees at work. But I think it can start tying some of that to actually improve business outcomes as well. As I said, I think if HR is going to have relevance in the organisation of the future, it needs to start providing insights that actually have an impact on the business. And I think by having an impact on employees, you can have a positive impact on the business as well. Employees are demanding a different experience at work now. They want the sort of experience they get as a consumer, where things are personalised for them and information is pushed to them that is relevant. And we hear a lot about at this show here at HR Tech World around tools that do that. Well, unless you've got good data and analytics underpinning it, you're not going to be able to provide employees with relevant information. Well, that's a good question. I think that's where a lot of organisations struggle. I think the first thing they have to stop doing is stop looking at things in silos. So we want to improve recruitment. We want to use data to do that. That's fantastic. But once people join, then their experience of the organisation and onboarding, as you said, and all the way through. So I think we can improve that partly because things like engagement and performance are moving from a once-a-year event to something that is more continual. So you get the ability for people to provide feedback on a regular basis. I always think that people analytics is putting steroids on organisational network analysis, which is something obviously that's been done for a long time, but suddenly you're able to do it on a regular basis. It's less based on surveys, although probably you want to augment that in as well. And you can really start to understand the central nervous system of the organisation, what makes teams productive, what maybe impacts on burnout of your high performers, And I think that's information that the business wants to know, and it's information that HR wants to know, so they can devise programs that actually try and eliminate that. Well, I think you've already got me on the organisational network analysis. I mean, we saw Josh Burson this morning. He was talking about how, you know, the HR systems of tomorrow perhaps are moving to understand and improve productivity. Well, I think, again, once you get into the central nervous system of the organisation and how it actually works, that's when O&A and people analytics powering that can really help to unlock what those insights are. And I think if HR can help solve the productivity problem in companies, then HR is going to have relevance and it's going to have impact. I think there's a skills and capability challenge with HR people generally, but what they have to remember is they don't have to become analysts themselves. They just need to either hire people who can do that work or work with people in the business who can. They need to be a bit more data fluent, I suppose, would be a good way of putting it. But actually, I think the biggest challenge probably facing the space is a whole ethics and privacy debate. I mean, some of the tools that we're talking about potentially using, analysing email, analysing wearable data. You know, there's lots of questions that need to be answered. I think you can answer that to some extent. Obviously, there's the law that we need to stay within, but I think the main way to answer that is if you can't articulate what the benefit is to the employees of doing something, then you probably shouldn't do it. And I think of all the functions within the business, I think HR is most likely to go with that kind of mindset. So, but I think the whole ethics versus employee benefit debate is probably the big discussion that we're going to be having over the coming years. I think it will be a core part of what HR does. I think it will underpin pretty much every HR program. I almost get the impression that we won't be talking about analytics so much because it will be a core component of each of the programs that we deliver. I'd like to think that everyone within HR, or at least the wide majority of HR, will be comfortable talking about data and insights and how it drives business performance and employee experience. But I'm an optimist. Well, I think I wish for it. It is a core component of HR. I believe that it is vital to the future of the HR function. And if we don't do it and do it well, then another part of the business will. And I suspect they will have more interest in business outcomes than they will in employee well-being and experience. So I think it's important for HR to grasp this opportunity.
So probably, as you see, the main concern is about to be aware of how to use the data, right? And in particular, with the idea of helping the organization and helping the people, yeah. So improvement the experience of working and organizing in the place, yeah. And this starts, with some sort of this paradoxical, concerns about people analytics, right? So it's first question that we have to ask: are we contributing to the people well-being or the people working experiences by analyzing this data or not? So the idea is that the analysis of the data is a justification in order to improve the conditions of working, and by improving the conditions of working help the organization as well. So it's a sort of circular mutual benefit. But the main concerns, the main intention of critically analyzed data is to first to help the people with the intention to finally benefit the organization, right? Or another question that we can ask: by analyzing and by making having access to this very detailed collection of data. Remember, we are talking about vast kind of data, not only superficial quantitative data, as probably you learn, you see what he was saying based on just general surveys, but we're talking about very in-depth analysis of qualitative data as well, right? Based on detailed interviews, re-scrutinized interviews, 360 exercises. So very observations, more ethnographic detailed data And this is could be very, very sensible, right? He referred, for example, about using the emails, accessing to the exchange of emails on people. And here we had in this gray zone about who is the owner of the emails, of the email exchanging when you are working in a place, you and the organization, or both. If the emails, the traffic of emails belongs to the organization because you are working there and you are using the email to work over the email in the organization, technically the emails belongs to the property of the emails are organization, but as well they are personal, right? So, and you see, or what's called wearable, information. That means the information that we are permanently produce just because of our everyday organizational interacting, yeah. And obviously there are issues about invisibility and about knowing, having the power, being in a position, in a power position of knowing what other ones do not know, right? And this is something very, very concerns to the ethical, right? Do we have as managers the right to know more than others who are not in a managerial position? Yeah? And by knowing is accessing to data, yeah. And obviously this temptation of using the data, this pragmatic, right, using the data for other purposes than helping the people, supporting improving the conditions of working. So these are the basic dilemma. So and probably just to summarize, if we have to how to tackle these issues about the ethical concerns and the way of producing and managing critical people analytics. So we have produced here some sort of like a guidelines, yeah. So some what we call steps, right? So the first step that usually we recommend is to define about the context. So what happening and where. So is any potential harm of using the data? So what is the context of producing this data in this way, and which are the risks of producing this data, right? In particular, the level, right? So are we talking about is any concerns? So should we move to producing data as a pure individual level or a more group level? The second step that usually we suggest, or the critical people analytics literature suggests, is the level of what we are analyzing, right? Group, individual, organizational level. Who is producing this? Is the corporate? Is because of the country? No, the nation states are profoundly extensive agents of producing data, right? Is data because the manager needs to be produced, or the leader? Which are the impact of this data? So which this data is intended to be used for, to maximize benefit, to give more power, to produce structural changes, like for example to decide about the merger and acquisition, right, and takeover, right? So it's to decide profound structural changes, right? Or organizational changes, just to change the structure, the way of working. So which are the purposes of doing this? Yeah. Or what is called project-based changes, like is to define new deadlines, new milestones. So the way of working, right? Organizing the people in a more project-based organizing culture, yeah. So why we want to produce this data? What is the final objective, right? Remember, the first objective is to help the people, to produce benefits for the people. But there is a secondary, there is something more that we have in mind when producing the data. That is, after improving the conditions, what we, as an organization, what we would be able to do better, right? And this has these ethical concerns. So now we invite you to produce our first exercise for this session, that is addressing the addressing the ethical dimensions or orders, how to decide about the order, right? In terms of our purposes of scrutinizing and producing data. Should we start by the individual, by the organization, by me? There are not right and wrong answers. So my invitation now to you is, imagine when in your our organization, when someone or yourself needs to start to work or need to produce a critical analytics strategy. From when you are going to start? Are you going to start about thinking about yourself, about the people, the social, the legal, the needs of the organization? So remember, the first agenda that you have is to improve the working conditions and the working experience of the people. But you have a secondary that you have to consider. Which will be the order on that? And so you can work on this on 10 minutes. Obviously, this is what we are going to do in our class, and then we are going to discuss. What about actions and alternatives? And this is the third probably stage that we recommend to take, right? To assume. So what we are going to do with this analysis? Which actions you are going to take, and which actions you are in this position to take. So are you empowered to make profound decisions based on the analysis, on the final conclusions of the analysis of this data? And who will be affected? The entire organization, an individual, a group? And remember, are you going to be affected? Are you going to at some point what will be the implications to you as an analyst by analyzing this data? The fourth stage that usually we suggest is to evaluate alternatives. Is any alternative of working on in this way? For example, are any other options for the participants to provide this data? So it's not, as you see, the idea is to try to avoid the imposition of a single way of producing and analyzing the data, but just to have a sort of plan B in order to discuss with the participants other ways, right? So you say, look, I found that producing this data and analyzing this data, I don't feel very comfortable of doing this in this way. You have an alternative of that. And the way of doing this is trying to make this decision in a particular context. And by context, we talk about an organizational context. Is any alternative to produce and analyze this data in the particular context of this organization? Finally, the last stage that we usually we suggest based on the literature is about the ethical alternative to be used, right? So for example, do we have the appropriate skills in order to ethically produce and analyze this data? Questions like, do we need to produce and analyze all of this amount of data? Could we limit ourselves to just to produce the amount of data that we need and not more? So I remember I usually discuss with critical analytics and usually consultants who produce this sort of amount of data, very detailed data. Which are the skills that you have in order to produce? And by skills, I'm talking about very pragmatic things, right? So imagine that you are interviewing, right? You decide to interview people in your organization in order to gather data for a future analytic project. So what happens if when you are interviewing, someone starts to cry? How you were going to react? what will be your ethical stand in front of this very emotional situation, really, right? And so you see, you have to be prepared. We have to be prepared in order to decide about the practical consequences of gathering data in this way. Finally, remember that something has to be behind the practice of critical analytics in terms of inquiring ourselves about the way of gathering the data and analyzing the data. Obviously, right, permanently you have to inquire yourself, am I acting in any sort of way of promoting or suggesting any sort of discrimination, or am I producing the data, or I'm allowed to produce the data, or I'm instructing others to produce the data that suggests any sort of stereotypification, right? Remember that, I want to change this and that, and maybe, with a very good intentions sometimes, right? Very good. I'm not saying that, with negative purposes, but as a matter of fact, usually we do this critical analytic exercises with the best of the intentions, right? But this doesn't mean that sometimes we can, for example, move to, for example, stereotype people, right? Stereotype people because of their accent, because of their race, because of the color of the skin, because of the age, the gender, the class, So how I managed to not to that is extremely difficult, right? How to avoid any sort of stereotypification of others and when producing the data. Also, how to, for example, make the participants and not what the literature refers as subalterns, right? Not only just someone who provide data, a source of data, right? Come here, complete these interviews or these questionnaires, and thank you very much. Then I will process the data by my own. This will be a very subalternization of the participant. The participant has to be a co-participant of the research, right? Not only a source of providing data. How we can guarantee this, or the visibility of the participants, avoid any sort of patronization or just cultural simplification, right? For example, avoiding any sort of cultural relativism, right? So you just be sensible about the cultural sensibilities, when producing the data. For example, you maybe in some ethnic groups you will not ask particular questions, right? It's considered that so the for example, the limits between the private life and the organizational life is culturally constructed. You see, so there are things that are on the sphere of the public or the organizational, and other things that they are on the sphere of the organization, right? So these two ways of constructing what belongs to the private life and the family life and the organizational life are culturally constructed, right? And we will move now to the group exercise 2, that basically you have there uploaded on Blackboard. That is a form of a template, a model of a form to complete if you want to start an exercise in the organization, and in particular an ethical form. So the exercise is to complete the form and to discuss into groups about which are the problems of completing these forms, right? Very good. So thank you very much, and quite open for any kind of questions and discussion. Thank you.